Alright class, this is products and quotients with complex numbers as well as de Moivre's theorem. So we're going to skip the warm-up because you can always go back to one of my other videos and watch how to do a problem like that. So we're going to go right to it. So when you multiply complex numbers, when it's in R-cis form, you want to multiply the r's and add the angles. Okay, so and here's a rule of thumb. Whatever you're doing to the complex number in polar form, multiplying, dividing, raising to a power, you do that to r. So r doesn't change. If you're multiplying, you multiply r's. You're dividing, you divide r's. It's the angles that add up or do different things. So in this case, we're going to multiply and then add. So depending on what I ask you, you can either just leave it in the cis form after you're done, or you have to then do rectangular. So it says for part A, let's leave it after we do the process, and B, then we're going to actually solve it. So for this one, we have the r's are 7 and 3, so our answer to this when we multiply these two numbers is 7 times 3, cis, parentheses, the two angles added up. So when I do that, I get 21 cis, 8 pi over 12, you could take a 4 out, 2 pi over 3. And that's it. That's it in polar form. Again, remember that's the shorthand for cosine of 2 pi over 3 plus I sine. So let's do it again over here. Again, to go to rectangular, you still have to do the initial thing like the other one, is multiplying the complex. So 7 times 5 is 35. Cosine of, if you add those angles together, you get 225 plus I sine of 225. Now that would normally be the answer if we left it in polar, like the last one. We would just say that's the answer. But we want rectangular, so to do that, we have to turn those into what they are in the unit circle. So this is a quadrant 3 angle that's a 45 reference, so they're both negative root 2 over 2. Oh, I don't need this sign anymore. Okay, so when we multiply 35 times that, we get negative 35 root 2 over 2, and then I'm going to use the minus out here, 35 root 2 over 2i. So that's our rectangular form of the answer. So, but notice again the pattern. When you multiply polar complex numbers, multiply the r's, add the angles. Now, when you divide the r's and subtract the angles. Okay, so again, because we're dividing, r is the same, we divide r, but we subtract angles. Alright, so now let's do those two. So I'm dividing, so I have 12 over 4, cis, and then we are subtracting 3 pi over 2 minus pi over 4. To subtract, you need a common denominator. This is 6 pi over 4. When you get a common denominator minus pi over 4, that's 5 pi over 4. So we get 3 cis 5 pi over 4. And then since part A we want to leave it in polar, we will leave it in polar form. Over here we're going to turn it to rectangular. So we get 18 over 6. Cosine of 110 minus 20 is 90 degrees plus I sine of 90 degrees. So we get 3 times the cosine at 90 is 0 plus I times 1. Because the sine at 90 is 1. So then we just get 3i. Is my answer for that in rectangular. So again, to go to rectangular is like solving it and getting it into a plus bi form. Keeping it in polar is keeping it in cis form. So that's multiplying, dividing. Now we're going to raise a complex number to a power. And again, to do that, you take the r and raise it to the power. So r goes to the number, and for theta you times the number. So this time you're multiplying theta by the number you're raising it to, and r you're raising it to that number. And that's kind of what this says here for you. So let's do those. So same thing as the last two, we're raising it and then we're keeping it in polar. So this one would be 3 to the 4th cis 40 times 4. So that's 81 cis 160 degrees. And then we're done. Here we raise 2 to the 5th power, and then we do cis pi over 6 times 5. So because I want to go to rectangular, I'm going to rewrite it in the other form, which is just cosine of 5 pi over 6 plus I sine 5 pi over 6. And 2 to the 5th is 32. So now we have to just figure out what those values are. That's a 30 reference in quadrant 2, which means that the x would be negative root 3 over 2 plus I times 1/2, because sine is positive in quadrant 2. So we get half of 32 is 16, so negative 16 root 3 plus 16i. So that would be the final answer in rectangular form. So again, multiply r's, add angles. Divide r's, subtract angles. Raise r to a power, multiply the angle times that power. Those are the 3 things you need to know. And that's it for today. Pretty short lesson. Pretty easy if you're in polar form already. So yeah, I'll see you on the last one.